Okay, everybody, this is Kevin Aguano. I'm going to be your moderator for this session. We have Andrew Schuster going to be doing a presentation in just a moment. However, I've been asked by the people on the other channel that some of you have said you can't connect to the other channel. So I'm posting the link to the other channel in the chat window. So I've just posted it in the chat window. It's a US06 web.zoom.us, that link. If you click that, you can jump over into the other session. So the other session is getting connected with Young Crew Canada. This section is preparing a project audit with Dr. Andrew Schuster. So I'll just give you a moment to decide which way you're going. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Andrew Schuster. He's a consultant, a practitioner, and an academic who focuses on bringing good practice to organizations who invest heavily to modernize their organization's digital and capital infrastructure. He's currently a partner in charge of PwC's Transformation Risk and Advisory practice. Dr. Schuster led the creation of the Guidance on Program and Project Audit published by the Association for Project Management in the UK, which is a sister organization to PMAC. It is the UK equivalent to PMAC. Dr. Schuster, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Just want to make sure you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Oh, good. Well, welcome to my little hovel here. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you today. And I left a comment in the chat here in terms of asking you for maybe a little bit on your experience with auditing, and if you have a chance to just pop a message in, either as if you've had experience as a sponsor, as someone doing an audit, as someone being done onto an audit, or if you have no experience with auditing. Either way, I'd just be interested if you could pop that into the chat. I get to know you a bit better. By way of introduction, I'm based in Toronto. My career, as many of you probably, you start as an accidental program project manager just because of the work that you do. And as an engineer, that's something that I came into and enjoyed very much, and started the journey to learn more about program project management. And along the way, the one thing that I discovered is the importance of auditing programs and projects, and really the value. I'm trying to understand the value and the impact of what project auditing can do for projects. I'm going to share some experiences that I have had and some of the things that I've published in this area, and I'll draw upon those to share my experience. And I do realize that I'm constantly learning myself. So hopefully you have a chance to reflect on what I'm saying, and you feel free to comment on your experience as well. So 3 particular publications that I've been involved with recently, and the one that I'm focusing on today is mentioned in the introduction, is on the left-hand side of your screen is the Association for Project Management's Guide to Auditing Programs and Projects. It's not yet published, and the rebranding, so the visual will look a bit different. But I also did a piece of research on looking at the value of assurance management practices, looking at a case study of very large programs and projects in Canada and the United Kingdom. And I also was a co-author of Managing Successful Programs. And a lot of the ideas that all 3 of these intersect. So I'm going to share a little bit about that and lessons that I've learned from some of my experiences working with large programs and projects. And I'll come at it from the position of best practice and maybe a bit of academic literature or perspective, but let's bring it to what's practical for you and your experiences, if we can try to do that. So what is project auditing? Maybe is a good place to start. And here are 2 definitions. And there's some key ideas and concepts that are really important in looking at these definitions. And one's by the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, where it's there to add value. And it's systematic. It's something that has to rigor, a structure, and it has an impact or focus on risk control and governance. So some key concepts in there. And the Association for Project Management has similar sort of view, but slightly different words. They talk more broadly about assurance, in which project auditing is one aspect, and focusing on the sponsor or the decision-making processes and decision makers that are in the governance structure. So it's really about providing some insights and value for the governance structures to ensure that things are in control and well understood. So here's a photo. This is in recent days outside of my window. And as a leader of a program and project, often we're getting messages that everything's sunny, it's lovely, it's well structured, that boat's going in the right direction, the waters are calm, and the day's beginning, and great things are going to happen. And this is based on the information that they're getting, the advice that they're getting, the reports that are going up. And the thing that they get challenged with is often the information they're getting is somewhat filtered and somewhat optimistic, because people want to do a good job to present things in the best light, but really the picture is perhaps something different, and it might actually look something like this. Really not sure what's going on. This is the same, by the way, this is from my balcony the same day. The first photo was in the morning, the second one was in the afternoon. So here in Toronto, we have a very foggy day. And the message here also is, in a smaller program or project where you have a quite intimate team, you can see, you can touch, you can feel, you get a good understanding what's going on, because everything is quite near to you. As programs become larger, projects become larger, more complex, they stretch in many directions, and really you can't see all the pieces. You really only are seeing a small part of what's going on, which begs the question, well, how do I get that insight? How do I get that kind of view of what is going on more broadly? And individuals that are working the program and delivering pieces often are in the same situation, and that they're focused on their piece, but who's getting that holistic view, and how do you actually bring some insights as to what's happening? So there's value here in terms of project auditing or the assurance management processes to try to get some way of understanding what's happening more broadly. So let's sort of unpeel that, and let's expose what's happening in that fog through the lens of project auditing and insurance. So I want to introduce, removing the fog a little bit with something I'm terming Nimble Assurance here. And Kevin mentioned some of these ideas about flexible and nimble a bit earlier in the presentations. And I want to come back to this idea, and it's a concept that's emerging around focusing on not agile as an agile technique or tool, but being nimble and flexible in terms of getting good quality information that's relevant and timely. So what does that look like? So traditional, and I'm using the word assurance here, by the way, and audit as one element of assurance. So let me stick with that for a moment if I can. So traditionally, the review processes for project assurance were very process focused. Have you done that thing? Is that document complete? It was reaction to some crisis or issue. Oh, we better go investigate that. It's sort of done onto the project as intervention to kind of find you out and find error. Sometimes it's about compliance, about what happened, and looking back in time of what's happened. And it might be at a single point in time. It's not looking at the eternal conversation and journey as things move along, and therefore you get a very static view. What we're trying to do is, in the more newer processes and ways of thinking about assurance and audit, is to think about, okay, well, how do we add value? Well, we do that by focusing on risks, by intervening in different points at the right time, by collaborating with decision makers so that we understand what's important to them and aligning with their interests and needs, and providing insight during the delivery of the piece of work or the program or project, rather than kind of being an outsider looking in that kind of pokes in from time to time. And it's progressive. It builds on the previous history, and that continuity of thought looking over time is really, really important. And it there becomes dynamic and sort of meaningful from that perspective. So aspects of good assurance, and I'm using the word assurance still here, although in the title we talk about project audit, because assurance is looking at a broader concept, but you could replace these same concepts for audit. What does it look like? It's independent, so someone's objective is coming in, providing a view. Now, independence, there's a spectrum of independence where it can actually be someone who's totally removed, or at least someone who's not self-reviewing their own work. So you can have a continuum of what does that actually mean. But the idea is you're looking for objectivity. So if you're reviewing your own work, it's hard to be objective, but you can have others review it in different ways, different individuals in different ways. Risk-based, which I've touched on before. So it's the things that are going to trip us up, the most, and risk being something that's uncertain about the future. So it starts moving you toward looking toward the future. It's planned and coordinated, so it isn't just something that happens in reaction. It's forward-looking in terms of planning. And the coordinated part is really important here, because what happens, and the larger the programs become, the more entities that are involved, and those could be different organizations, different parts of an organization, different projects, different programs. And what you can find is you've got different folks coming in to do reviews and assurance, and they can be piling in one area, often around finance and costing, but not looking at some areas where actually there's more risk, but nobody's really looking at it because it's not really their thing. So that coordinated view is in there. It's proportionate. So if it's something that's going to have a greater impact, greater risk, spend a bit more time on it. But if it's that you're doing it just to do it because you want to do a review, it's actually detracting from the delivery team's ability to deliver. So be mindful of the consequences of doing these kinds of work, because it draws energy away from the program. So you want to balance that. Accountability. So it's about decisions, responsibilities, and having a conversation with those that have accountability, rather than just reviewing things for the sake of reviewing them. And then impactful, which I think is self-explanatory, but it has to contribute to success. So it's got to be helping rather than just providing extra burden to what we're actually talking about in terms of the delivery processes. So six dimensions of what good looks like. So you can do a bit of a mental check of when you're doing either receiving, sponsoring, or doing audits or assurance, are you thinking about these particular dimensions? So how do you prepare? Okay, well, think about building a capability, a capacity, building an assurance service where audit fits into that as something that's actually quite relevant. And even if you're in a smaller program, and it might even be one person, think about these things to teams that are, I mean, I heard mentioned earlier on in the conversation, we've got programs, there's hundreds of people involved. Either way, still think about these elements of how this is going to be performed, and be mindful and specific. So audit and assurance needs to tie to your governance. It's there to support decision-making, to point out areas of concern and help come up with remedies and actions to address them. There's a pace, there's a rhythm, there's a cycle of doing activities and planning them so that they happen at the best, most opportune times. You're acknowledging the delivery cycle of the program or project that you're involved with, and that it's tied into your decision-making processes. To illustrate that point, if you've got a funding milestone where you've got senior people outside or deciding whether to provide additional funding or original funding for a program, well, that's probably a pretty good idea, a pretty good time to put in some confidence, some assurance. You know that's coming, so plan for it, prepare for it, and execute it, instead of them coming back after and saying, well, we're not sure about this, we're not comfortable giving you this funding because we don't have the evidence to justify the decision, and then you delay everything, and then the costs accumulate as a result of that. There's some specialist knowledge, integration. In terms of these larger organizational divides between teams, this is when I talk about it growing larger in terms of vertically and horizontal. How are you connecting up, and are you actually thinking about how assurance fits with those other things? And you do need methods and tools and techniques. So you're building a capability. This is a view of capacity and capability, which applies to assurance management. It also applies to other types of services, benefits realization, risk management, et cetera. It's a generic model that I've applied in other areas where you're trying to build up a service in the program office or program management office to support decision makers. This happens to be applied to assurance, but it could be applied to any of those other services as well. So it's a generic model, if you see what I'm saying. And when you build your strategy to set up your service for assurance management, these elements are things that you want to document, think about, get confirmation, and then decide how, for your particular situation, what it's going to look like. Write it down on a piece of paper, get agreement, and then execute on it. We talk about governance quite a lot. So one of the concepts in auditing and assurance are 3 lines of defense. So this is a genericized, there's different ways of drawing this, but this is one way that I find useful is you've got an organizational view And when the word program here is there's something in the middle, and you can put different words in there. It could be a portfolio, it could be a series of projects, it could be a big project, or it could be a program using the languages here. And by the way, it's got double M-E at the end. It's a British spelling for program. Apologies for that. So the key here, though, is to think about these levels. There's decision makers at these levels. Therefore, it needs to be audit and assurance at each of the levels. What does that look like? Build it in, think about it, think about how much you need, where you need it, and what it's going to look like using those 5 dimensions I've just described before. This thinking, by the way, is exemplified in one of the papers that I mentioned earlier when I looked at assurance management practices in the research project. I looked at 5 organizations, one of which, for example, was Shell, who they run, I think they've got several thousand program project managers in addition to all the engineers and other people that they have. And they use this kind of thinking in their kind of world. I also looked at a smaller insurance firm, which had just a small number of program project, and it's still applied in their context as well. So this will work in your organization, although the language might shift and you might have to think about it in a slightly different way. Ultimately, it's who are your decision makers? How are they being supported? And to be clear on what that looks like. The audit, in terms of audit, tends to sit at the top of this level, and we hear it more when you hear internal audit, and they tend to sit in a corporate function, and they do reviews for those departmental level decision makers. Although audit can happen in the different levels, and they can deep dive into the different levels. So this is why when I built this around assurance, it's the whole model. Audit is one aspect of it, but you need to build it as a unified kind of concept. Auditing roles, 3 key roles. When I asked the question earlier around, what is your role? So there's 3 fundamentals. You're either a decision maker, you're commissioning the reviews, you're an auditor doing the reviews, or you're an auditee being done unto. And you'll fall into one of these roles, or maybe even multiple of them, depending on your particular circumstances. But the idea is at least to recognize that these are roles that are important and relevant to the auditing process. There's a standardized, and this might be where some of your thinking went to initially in terms of preparing for an audit. In terms of, there's a pretty generic process. There's variations to this, but in essence, it's, and I'll look at it from the perspective of internal audit, well, applies for other kinds of reviews as well, is you have to plan it, you have to agree what areas you're going to focus on, what risks you're going to put your attention on. You scope and plan the review and set up terms of reference, and there's a bit of a process to say how much time you're going to spend, how big it's because a mini project of its own inside of the larger pieces of work. And often in the audit world, they'll call it a project. Their terms, it's a project. Different perhaps than what you might be thinking, but in their world, that is a project, a piece of work, beginning, end, team, start, complete, finish, report, move on. The field work then generally focuses around conducting interviews, collecting documentation, assessing that information, and looking for some kind of sense within that information, the first level of analysis. And then it sort of needs to be synthesized into something that's meaningful for management. And then you start looking at root causes, priorities, what matters more, what matters less, and try to consolidate those into a smaller number of findings and then ultimately report. And then management areas need to take action. Now, the important thing here, though, is the information that's coming into these processes, the audit processes, is really coming from other areas of the program around your planning information, your risk management, your quality management, your cost. All of those areas feed into it. And there's a common set of challenges and risks that we see in programs and projects, and you can model what that looks like and then go looking for those particular risks depending on where the program is in its evolution. The key thing here, though, there's a couple things to highlight if you're scoping, delivering, or receiving these, is try to keep the period, the duration of this work as short as possible. And the reason why, because the program or project moves on, and by the time you get to reporting, often things have moved on and you're there not providing value to managers. So the shorter you can make this time frame, and this is where this nimble concept comes about. What I try to encourage in practice is this this review cycle, and this can be repeated from different areas, should not last more than 6 weeks. And I've seen audits that last months and months and months, and they become meaningless after a period of time. But if you do multiple audits with a shorter period of time, provide insight, and then look at something different, you can find that actually it has more impact. The second thing is it's also moving along and progressing. It's progressive and it moves along with the program. So the outputs from one of these reviews feeds into the planning for the next, and you use it really applying some of your agile concepts of, you create in essence a backlog, and you then look at the next thing and you kind of move on from there in the context of the delivery of what's happening in the program. So when you're earlier on in a program, you're looking at planning kinds of things. When you move on further on, you're looking at more design, conceptual, build, road mapping to when you start to cut over or transfer, implement these things, and you're looking at, are you ready for go live, and whether it's a capital project or a digital project. And the audit process is compliant value in all those different areas, depending on the key risk. Important concept, which I've touched on here, which I want to highlight as well, is assurance management was linked to other services. And you want to prepare, well, if you want to have good assurance management, you need to have good other services like knowledge management. What's the quality of the information? Are you developing lessons learned? Risk management. Are you tracking and monitoring risk? Do you understand the risks in the program? Where would an audit provide most value? Benefits realization. What matters most? Where is value being derived? How is it being derived? And therefore, where should the audit focus its areas? I mean, quality management. If you notice, this is not quality assurance. I make a distinction. Quality management is its own thing, separate from assurance management, and quality assurance is a little bit of both, but neither. So I try to make that distinction, and can have a conversation about that later if you want. But quality management, different tools done by different people for different reasons. But what it's looking at is your quality indicators for the overall journey that you're on, and those can be quite high level or quite specific in terms of tangible thing. So when you're preparing, is the question, the point here is, how are you connecting assurance management, your audit processes, into what other people are doing so information is flowing? And if you can build that in an active way, your audit processes from externally coming in actually become less valuable. What becomes more valuable is joining up within the program, and you're self-assuring as you go, because you've joined up these things and you have good quality decision making with insights from what's happening in all these areas as you move along. And the audit process has then become an exception rather than something that is fundamental. And that's why I make the distinction between assurance management and audit. Audit is that one element of assurance. Assurance is the entire system with these joins built in. I'm going to a couple more slides, and then I'm going to open up some questions. So if you've got questions you want to put in the chat, please do so. I'll see if I can actually see them, I'm not sure. So there's a cadence to doing these reviews and one perspective, the Infrastructure and Project Authority of the United Kingdom, which looks over the government major project portfolio, the largest programs in government. It oversees something like a $500 billion or pound portfolio of programs and projects, 200 of the largest programs. They build a gating system, and they say, okay, when you hit these gates, you should do an audit. And as you move through those processes, like the delivery, you're looking at different things, but they associate one structured thing they look at is, over time, here's a gate, here's a decision. Usually there's a funding decision. It's usually at a sponsoring or a corporate level. Okay, they want valuable information to support the decision. So you must do an audit at agreed points in these gates. Another perspective in terms of the cadence of doing audits, and there's a case study of this happens to be BAE Systems, is they have this is one of their models that they use, but they look at temporal, the gating views. They also look at status, so where is the risks, and go do reviews in that area. And also they look at the delivery life cycle in terms of the stages that you're in, and decide to do reviews at different places based on the life cycle of the program or project. And they build their plan in of when they do audits and how big they are, how many is built around this kind of thing. So one thing I'm going to caution you is, you know, before audits come in, often things are a bit bumpy, and that's normal. You're developing, you're in progress, and we try to hide during the audits and make things look lovely and wonderful. And actually, that's not very, very helpful, really, for anyone. And if actually you work collaboratively with the auditing team and community, it can help you on the delivery side, because it can draw attention to areas that are problematic that you've been trying to solve previously. You can use the audit process in a positive way to help you draw attention, to get resources or attention, whatever you need. But if you hide that, you're going to go back to the pre-situation, and really it doesn't help add value. So I would caution, use the audit processes to your advantage, whichever role you happen to be in, including none, I guess, maybe, and move from there. And I'm going to stop there, some parting thoughts, and then I'm mindful of the time. I want to open up to some questions and really get to understand some of the things that you might want to explore a bit more. Are you prepared for what's coming? So just really think about it as a part of a holistic assurance management service to focus on value and outcomes. And if done well, it is a value-added activity. It's not something just to endure and to kind of make do with. So I'll stop there and really open up to questions and comments. And if you want to share your experience with audit, good, bad, or indifferent, I'd be interested in any questions that you have. I'll try to answer. So, any comments? Does assurance management is linked to an integrated management tool? Can you come off mute? I want to understand you by integrated management. I would say yes, but I want to understand what you mean by integrated management, integration management.
Thank you so much for your speech. Especially for the big projects, they have too many components, and arranging those components, directing them together is going to be a big piece of work that can assure your future success. And if you ignore it, definitely is going to have a big impact. But in your presentation, I didn't see that. I was wondering, you may consider it in other aspects or no?
I'm not sure if I fully understand your question, but when you talk about integration management, when you're bringing different components together before a go-live situation, is this what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so integration management, I mean, is one particular area of management, again, and focused on one particular aspect of a program. And assurance should join with integration management along with all those other types of management that I mentioned earlier. The question, though, ultimately, though, is how big is the risk associated with integration management? What are the things that you want to investigate and have an objective opinion? If it's working fine and you're confident that you're in control, then an audit and assurance doesn't really need to spend a lot of time thinking about integration management. If integration management is a higher risk or a concern, and when you're at a particular stage of a program, it will become a concern, then it should play a role in that. Those processes should come together in those activities, and there should be some investigation to look at how well integration management is working. You need to decide when that happens, and then obviously execute that investigation that I've just mentioned. Does that answer your question? But integration doesn't start at the time when you're just delivering. It actually starts earlier in terms of your planning process as well. So you can look at integration as you are in early stages to the point you're executing, depending on where you think the risk is. That makes sense. This is why your risk management processes are really important to drive that conversation.
Thank you so much.
The second question here that I have is, can you comment on audits assessing against the standards such as CMMI and how they create value during the audit versus just issue a grade or pass, fail? Well, I would say there's two things. Is when you're doing audits or reviews or assurance, you should be assuring against something. So what is the framework? What is the thing you're measuring? And there's usually three types. There's published standards, and CMMI is one. You could, if you decide that's the right one for your situation, depending on the nature of the program, whether it's capital, digital, etc. There's different standardized frameworks. There'll be a standard potentially within the organization using for that particular thing because it's a repeated process. Different industries have their own, or organizations sometimes develop their own, or some cases there isn't really something that's fit for purpose. So one of your exercises is to build what the assessment framework would look like and then execute it. So that, to me, that's sort of the first part, I think, of your question is you should always measure against something, and sometimes it's an industry standard, sometimes it's not. Then the second thing, in terms of creating value during the audit, issuing a pass or fail. To me, it's not about pass or fail. Again, it's what are the risks? What are the insights you can develop by assessing that? And therefore, what are the actions we should take looking forward to inform future decisions? If it's a pass fail, that sounds to me like it's a compliance review, which is just saying, did you fill out those documents? And then I would say, okay, well, what is management going to do with that information? That's nice. What does it tell me? Not very much. In some cases, though, you do want to, so that's a general question. Sometimes you need a pass fail to meet certain criteria in certain areas in order for something to proceed. And there's a decision there. So it's linked to governance to make a particular decision. And the one illustration I made earlier is around funding. Sometimes you need to know there's, it's got to be within a certain cost envelope, and the tolerance in your assumption has to be something that's set by the organization. And I need to know yes or no, does it meet those criteria? Otherwise, I can't give you my decision. So in that case, it's useful. But the way you worded it, it sounds like it's not very useful because it sounded very generic. Yes, you comply with the standard. And I would say, so what? If I'm understanding your question. So again, we're looking for insights, we're looking for impact, we're looking for forward thinking and decisions, influencing our decisions. So hopefully that answers your question. Is that fair? Yes. Maybe I'll move on. I don't know if that was from sorry, and the next one is, I think in practice it's rare that project managers, executives see audit assurance as a value-added service and work with the audit team collaboratively. I would agree with that, which is why I made this point. This would require fundamental culture change. So the question is then really, if you're putting money into an assurance or audit function, what can you do to make that better? And if you're in those three roles that I've described, being either a commissioner of audits, doer of audits, or receiver audits, you have a way of influencing the impact of those and how you design and make them valuable, which is why I try to share some of those concepts. How can you shift the culture in that direction so that it is about actually providing value? And if it isn't providing the value that it needs to, it tells me something else, is you're putting your program projects at risk, because if it's set up well, it will make a difference to the success of your programs and projects. So perhaps there's some work to be done to change that culture, and some work to be done within your organization. I would ask, is there ways that you can influence that? And some organizations are quite progressive and actually understand that, are working to improve it. If yours isn't, then perhaps you might have a way that you can influence that, or think about ways that you might want to influence, because money is being spent against for those particular functions. Let's make the best use of it, that investment. So I wouldn't disagree with your point there. Any other thoughts on questions? I didn't get a full idea and understanding, and maybe I'll ask it again in terms of, in this group, how many of you have committed? I'll ask them one at a time. How many of you have commissioned reviews, audits, or assurance of some kind? Well, hands up in the chat. Looking at the chat box. So doesn't look like it's something that we've commissioned. How about executing? Oops, we got a hand up there. Is that a yes? I think from Ali, you've commissioned. Or you want to ask a question? If you come off mute, if you want to ask a question, Ali?
No, I just raised my hand answering your question.
Okay, so you have, okay. So we have at least one, which is great. In terms of actually conducting audits and executing audits, any takers? And then finally, auditees. How many of you have been audited and been receivers of audits. There's Chris. So maybe you can share your experiences, Chris, in terms of you receiving audits and maybe insights. If anything, if you can maybe join the dots, anything that I said that resonates, or you can tell me I'm full of bump and and then I haven't hit the mark. I'm happy to hear your feedback in terms of your experiences receiving.
Well, unfortunately, I had to miss the first part of your presentation due to a client meeting. However, where I've experienced most of my project audits have been at the federal level, where it's less actually about outcomes than it is about compliance. So I've had that at with public services and procurement. I've had that with the Department of National Defense, and I've also had it with the RCMP, where they loop back less on did you achieve the results, the outcomes that were anticipated. It was more about, did you follow the process, especially around procurement, and that is none of those experiences were quote unquote value added in any way.
Yeah, fair point.
However, I did help influence a common client of ours that in terms of their updating their audit and assurance framework to be more agile. And I would be interested in, maybe you presented it, to what extent that particular client, which I will not name unless you choose to do so, have they in fact moved from the did you get it done in the box to more of an agile thinking perspective?
Some of the things that I've shared, and I don't know if it's the one we're thinking the same one, but made some progress in terms of having more progressive audits. The second thing is in terms of aligning the work one organization is doing for their audit review with other organizations, so that not everyone's piling in and asking the same questions. And these ideas of having an integrated plan across multiple organizations, when you've got a central monitoring organization, a department, and then an oversight body, all three of them and others are providing different regimes and trying to get them to coordinate. And we've had some success in that, but ultimately the question or the objective there is to try to streamline and maximize the value of that, and to recognize that it's something we have to think about. As one of my messages is, just like you build plans and you build processes for other things, this is also somewhere you've got to think about building. And actually the success of the capability, are you in building that capability, will influence the success of your program. Because this can become a very hindering thing if it's not designed well. It just puts roadblocks, creates delays in time, and doesn't necessarily help decision making. And what we want to do is try to make it stronger. So what I was sharing from the beginning of the presentation through is best practices, the ideas we want to aspire toward, the things we want to achieve, which isn't to say that all organizations do in fact operate that way. So there's a comment here, Karen. It was frightening. What was frightening? Sorry, I wasn't quite sure the context of that. It'd be useful to hear what was scary. This was one of your experiences, I take.
Oh, that's right. It was completely frightening because I had never gone through the process before. It was in the banking industry, and the thoroughness of the audit was almost upsetting, that they would wait so long into the project and bring all of these things up that had not been done previously. So there was a time element, and being overloaded with the work to meet the audit standard was something that overwhelmed me because of the workload involved in meeting the audit standard. On the other hand, there was an appreciation. I always say audit is your friend, because it actually brings your own standards up.
Yeah.
And it helps you become more professional in your outlook, and you take that forward with you into other projects. And that's the value that it actually has, not just to the organization, but to you as a profession.
Yeah, absolutely. So Karen, in that role, the one thing I would encourage is as well is to keep recognizing the value and to aspire to make improvements and to leverage within like your audit. Sometimes is seen as some of the outside coming in, but you'll have a sponsor or someone that's sitting at the top of your program or project. If that was you or someone else, I'm not sure, but they have a relationship and to help manage the scope, the timing, and the aggressiveness of that. So really to work with your internal team to try to manage the pressures on you. Sometimes there is additional pressures. But thank you for sharing that.
Andrew, there was just one other point, and that was how much things were negotiable. And that was also a flexibility that was built in.
Yes, that's a really good question. And it depends. Often it is more negotiable than you think. And that's where the role of the sponsor, the person that's sitting on the program, has an opportunity to influence what happens in the audit and when. Sometimes it's mandatory things that it just has to be done, but they can help influence the scope and timing. So really don't always think that you're a victim of it. Try to do it and use that attitude that you have to do in a collaborative way. I'm going to shift, if I can, to, I think, Kevin, if that's true, what should PMs do to prepare their projects for an audit? In general, what I would say this is, if you are organized in your program or project, the audit process should be much easier to conduct if you understand, if you know what's coming and the scope of it. So what I've done in some cases is basically do a mini internal audit and run through the process that the program is going to run through. Do it light touch, though, so you know what's going to be good. So that way forces you to line up the document, like the very tactical, lines up the documents and the conversation, and you can help speed up the work of the audit. But also, it's probably something, if it's a risk area that requires an audit, it's probably something you should be putting a little more attention to anyway. So yes, think about that whole process that the audit would run through, and you could do a pre-audit audit, but try to just think in terms of and how much effort you want to put into. You obviously want to minimize, but actually prepare for what's going to be coming, and you already have an idea of who has to be talked to, what documents going to be required, what are the risks that are going to be involved, and you can kind of get it pre-set up. So when the auditors arrive, it's all quite an easy, simple process for them. They're going to obviously want to do their own analysis as well, but that's fine. You can make it much easier and accelerate that process. I hope that helps. Project control book with assembly primarily to be ready for auditors. Yeah, and you've kind of partially, exactly. And the thing that around that is, what are you, ultimately you're looking for is, they're looking for is, are you in control? So your controls handbook, or project control book, is, where are the areas that you're likely to have risks and you need more control or more structure, then that's where you should have evidence that you actually have it in place. The one thing I would caution about controls books, and I don't know if this is the case with you, Kevin, or if that's from you, is sometimes they're just applied blindly, that everything, no matter what it is you use the same level of control, the same depth and breadth, and some things get too much control and some things don't get enough. So that you still have to apply that thinking with a risk-based mindset. But having the control book gives you a roadmap, at least a starting point. So people that are coming into the program new aren't starting from scratch. So actually, that sounds like it was a great idea. Chris, need to have disciplined approach to managing documents and decisions. And I would say that's fundamentally important whether or not you're doing an audit. So, and I use the term knowledge management, because your knowledge management is, are you managing your information, but also are you doing something? Are you looking at it? Are you looking at it? Never mind the auditors. Are you looking at it, and are you reviewing it, developing your own lessons learned? You don't need the auditors to come in and look at it if it's an area that requires attention. And we as a program project management team should be getting that insight anyway, providing it to management, so that the bumpy road before is transparent and we can see through the fog. So information management is quite critical to actually maintain the success of good decision making, right? And then the final point here is a good auditor focused on the spirit of the rules. Yes, and you're said better than I did earlier, Kevin, in that is, yes, you have a guidebook, but you got to apply it with intelligence, and that's what sounds like you're emphasizing. So absolutely correct. So I'm going to stop there. We're at 45 minutes unless we have any outstanding questions. I think that was my time limit. Hopefully that was useful. I'm happy to, if anyone wants to follow up with specific questions. And again, there were 3 particular guidebooks or resources where I've written some of this stuff down, and the slides that I've pulled together are largely from those. So managing successful programs, the guide to auditing programs and projects, which is in its final publishing state with the Association for Project Management, should be ready. The older version is there. It's dated and has some problems, which we were updating it. And the last one is I did this research report on the value of assurance management. And either one of those documents, if you have a chance to get your hands on them, will give you further insights and more language and a bit more description of what I described here. And thank you for the recommendation on an MSP, Chris. I've been involved with the 5 versions that it's been written, and the most recent one is getting closer to something that I'm more proud of than the earlier version. So happy about that. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time, and on to the next sessions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to take a break now, and we will resume at 2 p.m. sharp, 2 p.m. Eastern. So